basically. So he has implemented the Bootstrap mobile-friendly responsive template into Joomla. He was in charge of that project, and he's also the usability engineer at eBay at the moment. So he's basically he's Skyping in and talking live. I think is he what we can.
Yes, he will be. Carl, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll go through his presentation as before, and if you've got questions, we will pass them to Carl at the end. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I hope everybody's having a great morning over there. It's about 6:45 p.m. over here on a Friday, so if you guys don't mind, I'm enjoying a beer. Yeah, I did that on purpose. You shouldn't see me at this point. I'm very honored that you guys invited me to speak. I love the fact that for Joomla events, I can speak from Austin, Texas, around the world, literally. I'm very sorry I couldn't make it out there. I would have loved to have been there. Never been to Australia. Traveled a lot in the past couple of years for Joomla, and I intend to make it out there next year. If you guys can see the screen, for everybody that doesn't know what it looks like, this is a big picture of my ugly face. On Twitter, my hashtag is just my name. My username is just my name. It's Kyle Ledbetter. And we could dive right in. I'll tell you a little bit about what I do at eBay. I joined a Joomla team. It's coming up on 2 years ago now. It's been a long time, but also it's flown by. They started using Joomla for a massive collaborative analytics platform. So basically, imagine all the 30,000 employees of eBay, they want to log in, and it's a combination of Google Finance, Google Analytics, and GitHub. So we serve all different types of people. We serve developers, just business users that want to see how good the business is doing. The VPs want to log in every morning and see how good everything in eBay is doing. So we serve all this data, petabytes and petabytes of data, one of the largest data warehouses in the world, and we serve it up all through a Joomla site. So I don't think it's any stretch of the imagination to say that we do some of the most extensive work, and we serve up some of the most data through Joomla out of anybody in the world. And I work with a bunch of the guys that started Joomla, so it's a really thrilling project, and we do some really cool stuff. So for my part, I joined the team as a usability engineer, as the lead for the project. And when I started, essentially, it was a very vanilla, not very attractive Joomla site that was using things, tons of extensions like Jom Social, Kunina, a lot of these things, and it was running Joomla 1.5. At this point, we're on the Joomla platform, which, if you're not familiar, is kind of the core that powers Joomla. It's the libraries. And we've created completely custom, we call it the UCM, the Unified Content Model. And essentially, we're outside of the Joomla world that you know. We run our own UI, and we do things a lot through JavaScript instead of PHP. And we do a lot of fancy stuff that even I don't really understand, to tell you the truth. But for the UI, about a year ago, I rebuilt the entire UI library. I'd been planning to write it from scratch. And it was fate, honestly, I think. But it was right around the time that Bootstrap 2.0 came out. And everything that I wanted to do, the same style that the site was designed in, all the UI options I needed, these guys from Twitter had done the same exact thing, and for the same exact reason. They did it for Twitter. I was inside eBay. They were doing all internal sites, and they needed vastly replicated, reusable, versatile UI elements because they kept rewriting CSS over and over, and it became an extreme burden to update it and to add new elements and to serve the company, essentially. So I fell in love with Bootstrap at that point just because of this, and we implemented it on our Joomla site there. And I instantly knew that we had to do it for the rest of the community. Real quick, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Bootstrap at this point. If you're not, it's a UI library. It's one of the most complete. from end to end. Because I'm sure at some point you used a grid system or a JavaScript library or a responsive library, something like that. They completely gave you something end to end, which is why I fell in love with it. You didn't have to duct tape a lot of things together. It was something I could just drop in and start using. So inside eBay, I realized that this can really be used for everybody. We've easily built 150 custom user interfaces for all the different things you can do on our site, because our site serves a community that's so varied. It's everything from blog to news to forums to photo galleries, very complex workflows, wizards that involve multiple steps, all kinds of crazy things that I've never seen before in my life. So we built tons of UI, and the beauty of it was we barely ever had to write CSS. We just changed the configuration of the HTML around a little bit, and everything worked and delivered a UI. And then when we want to update, it was seamless because we weren't messing with the core of Bootstrap. So it's kind of like, you know, if you use Joomla in the past, you don't really hack the core, and if you don't put too many crazy extensions on top, it's easy to upgrade moving forward. The same kind of thing. We weren't really messing with the core of it. We were getting creative with the HTML, and we built all these UIs, and now it's super easy to maintain. So obviously, this could be applied to the Joomla world. About 2 years ago, actually, the same time I joined eBay, or maybe a little before. Yeah, actually, probably like a year before, to tell you the truth. We started talking about the Joomla User Experience Project. And if you're not familiar with UX, it basically encompasses usability, which is how you click on things and how, if you use screen readers, how well those work, and if you're colorblind, and all these things in different languages around the world like Joomla, how usable it is. User interactions, when you click on something, when you swipe on something, what happens. User interface, obviously, which is kind of like your cockpit or your dashboard while you're using Joomla. So it encompasses a lot of different things, and we called it the JUX project. It started on the Joomla people site, and it quickly became more of a movement. The next thing was, as soon as it became a movement, somebody I talked to was Brian Osmondek originally, who I'm sure most of you know. He was the OSM president and the cheerleader for Joomla. I met him in Dallas a couple of years ago, and he heard my presentation on it, and he said, you know, you should do this for the core. I was doing it for myself and templates and extensions, and he said, you need to do this. So what do I need to do to make this happen? And I was really encouraged by that. So he empowered me, and I started traveling and speaking at all these events across the world. And more, I started with front-end users, but more and more, the back-end users and developers started to get excited about the whole idea of this UX movement. But JoomlaDay is like the one that you're at right now. We're absolutely pivotal. If they didn't exist, this wouldn't have happened. So this was a pretty unique process. Everybody used to think that Joomla was controlled by some black box core team that was hard to get in, and they didn't know who they were exactly or how to contribute code. And to a certain extent, there's a little bit of that these days, but for the most part, all that's gone. The community completely developed this whole JUX project. It was a bunch of people, everybody from some existing core contributors, which were just volunteers, so it's never a core team, to all these guys that run extension shops like me and Peter from No Number, and Pedro from iMacma, and the guy that used to run Joomla Praise with me, Gary, and a ton of people. And basically, we talked about all this whole project through Skype. We used GitHub, which is really cool that the project uses GitHub now. They're not completely 100% on it, but for all of the Joomla 3.0 stuff that we did it through GitHub. And we're using the most modern technologies, CSS3, HTML5, and I actually did a lot of communication through Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you would have seen throughout the whole development, I was constantly tweeting pictures and screenshots and getting immediate feedback from people, which is awesome, right? this is probably the first major release of Joomla that had that kind of sharing and feedback process. So I really enjoyed that. So just going through how it all played out, when we started developing 3.0, phase one was just to get feature parity, which just means that everything they had in there already, we couldn't break, right? We couldn't take a step backwards. So we had to update it. We dropped in Bootstrap. We added jQuery. We built a new admin template. We built a new front-end template. But we had to make sure that everything that was there before was there in 3.0. The next phase, which was the fun phase, was improving user experience. And this isn't over by any means, but the most evident user experience that we improved was the installation process. It used to be this cumbersome 7-step process with all these things that didn't really make sense, like a whole step just to agree to the license agreement when it could just be a link. So now it's a rapid 3-step process. It's really intelligent. I had designed a rough draft, but largely Peter from Donover did a lot of the programming and the JavaScript, and of course the rest of the JUX team perfected it. But this is the first thing you see. This is the first part of the user experience of Joomla, right? So I was really thrilled about that. And the rest of it was all the front end and the back end. We started with the back end, and we built a new template because we had to have full Bootstrap support to even really start. But once we had that new template, we could start playing around with things like the module editing process and the menu creation process and the article editing views. So all these things we could start to improve and move things around and experiment a little bit. And the same thing to a lesser degree with the front end. Once we got the template and all the components working on the front end, we did get a great chance to really play around with how everything worked. And I'll speak about that later. I'm hoping to be able to do that in Joomla 3.1 and 3.5. But that was the fun phase, and the phase that we obviously ran short on time. We had lots of great plans, but we didn't get to do everything just because it's a huge process, completely touching every file in Joomla. I don't know why I was such an optimist. I didn't think it would take as long as it did, but it was difficult, and we did a lot. One of the biggest features in 3.0 is more for developers that I absolutely love. We kind of nicknamed the JUI, the Joomla SDK, kind of like for iOS or Android when you're developing an app. It's really cool because you have everything you need. You don't have to add all these libraries and all these crazy things that people did previously in Joomla for all the UI and interactions for their components. At this point, you can literally write a component without adding any JavaScript or CSS because it's all there. Of course, people are going to add their own and they need to tweak it, and that's Joomla. That's fine. But it's going to be all standardized, which is the beautiful part. Using all the latest tools, which is great because it's forcing people to drop these old crazy libraries like the Zen framework with Jom Social, and a lot of other people were loading these massive libraries and frameworks that were fighting each other. So now we're all standardized. And the greatest thing is that it's available everywhere. In all the previous Joomlas, everything was in the admin, but you really had no standardization or anything available on the front end. But we realized that people are building essentially interfaces on the front end and back end, so you need all the same tools. We have Bootstrap. We've customized Bootstrap for Joomla developer needs, so we call it Extended Bootstrap. Because Bootstrap comes with some icon sprites, but they're just images. Font icons. It's a font-based vector icon, so it can be any size, any resolution for all your mobile devices and the new Retina displays. And it's a massive library. There's about 1,000 icons. We dropped in about 140 or 170, but we're going to be adding more. We moved over to jQuery, and we've added jQuery UI, which of course the world uses. So it's wonderful to have that in there. And you might notice that we have some fancy select boxes that do a lot of different things. Those are called chosen select boxes. So just to go through, hopefully you guys have tested 3.0 and you've seen this yourself. But the installation process is very abbreviated. Like I said, it's just 3 quick steps. and you're done. And there's cool new features like you can email the configuration to yourself, so you can have a backup of that. The admin GUI, which I've talked about, is all Bootstrap. This is the new login, and everything, of course, works on mobile devices. This is the new article editing, and I was talking about UX. This is a prime example of once you have all the UI tools in place, how you can play around with the UX. In Joomla 2.5, you have to scroll down, 3 full screen lists to get to the text editor. But now it's the main feature because you're obviously editing an article. And there's that chosen select box I was talking about. That's one of our custom uses for the module positions. And of course it works on tablets and phones. I talked about the front end, and it's just important for the front end to have all these same features, right? There's a new template called Protostar. And everything's very, very, very vanilla Bootstrap. We didn't want to get crazy with it because we wanted to kind of lay down the framework for template clubs to take that and customize it. We wanted to, and we also wanted to use it as example UIs based on Bootstrap, so you can obviously compare it to the Bootstrap site. So with that being completely responsive down to phones and tablets, this does make Joomla 3.0 the first major CMS to be completely responsive. It's really cool. That wasn't really one of the goals when we were setting out on this, but that became one of the big marketing points. So let's talk about less for a second. If you're not familiar with less CSS, it's a shorthand, and it used to be just JavaScript, but now it can be compiled with PHP and things and just actually rendered out to CSS. It's really cool because you can use lots of things called mix-ins, which are shorthand things for box shadows and rounded corners, and you can use variables for things like colors. So it becomes much easier to customize and theme all the UI elements that come with Bootstrap and now come with Joomla. So our approach with this is really cool, and template devs will need to know all this to really harness the power of Joomla 3.0. In templates now, you'll find a less folder. You can check all this out in the Protostar template. We have template.less. And what it does is it uses the import, and this isn't a regular CSS import. This renders it out to one CSS file, which is good for browser speed and all the tests that you would run for speed tests and things like that. But what it does is you import all these things from a JUI folder that we have, right? This is all the core Bootstrap stuff and the stuff that we've customized for JUI. You have the option to include anything that you want and leave out anything that you want. Of course, if you leave out certain elements, you won't have them styled in your template. But so you can import all these things. But then what you can do in your folder, over on the right, you see that I have variables and mixins.less. Instead of using what we have in the core, you can copy that into your template and you can totally customize it. So essentially, all you really need is variables.less to copy over and change all the hexadecimal colors and all the values, and you can totally customize the appearance of not only the core of Joomla, but these are the same styles that all the components are going to be using. So no more do you have all these crazy CSS files fighting each other, loading in the core components, loading in your template, overriding styles. There are no styles loaded until you load them in your template. And when you do this template.less, it renders out to one template.css for everything. So that's pretty amazing if you think about it. This is going from the Wild West where everybody could have all their custom CSS files fighting each other to one totally controlled environment from your template, which is where it should be. A template is the theme of Joomla. It should control the appearance. One of the things I was talking about was the fact that we've included everything for the front end. And some people were kind of confused about this at first, but hopefully when I talk about that template.less, you understand. From the front end, you're going to run across all these UI elements. Some components use it very lightly, but even the core of Joomla loads buttons, tooltips, icons, thumbnails. A lot of big components these days load UIs on the front end. We developed Project 4, and we have task lists, We have every imaginable actually UI you think of: milestones, projects, file manager, discussions. So we used to have to maintain our own framework of CSS just to support these elements, or just import it from the back end of Joomla, which was always dicey. But now it's the complete exact same standardized UI elements. And a really cool thing that I'm actually going to do something with myself soon is I can make an app GUI kind of theme for the front end of Joomla. Then I can quickly flip it to the back end of Joomla. So you can have a seamless front end and back end experience for Joomla because it's all the same UI being served up on both sides. I was talking about standardized components, and this is just some mock-ups that I did. This was to kind of sell people on the idea, but this is actually happening now. People are building their components. But you can build any kind of UI that you can dream of, like I said earlier. Shopping carts, galleries, event calendars, blogs, activity streams, social components, contact forms. Everything you see here didn't require any extra lines of CSS. It was just moving around the available markup that comes in Joomla 3.0. So a lot of people, every time there's a major release of Joomla and you have to update, people freak out and they start writing blogs and they say, don't move to the new version of Joomla. Components aren't ready, templates aren't ready, and that's true for a very short while. But for Joomla 3.0, it's the fastest adoption I've ever seen, seriously. Some of the major clubs, which have tons of templates, are already updated, and if they're not updated, they're in the process, and they're not upset about it. They're actually excited about it because they get to cut out things. All these template clubs have these frameworks and custom UIs, but a lot of now they can cut out their libraries they were using and just use Bootstrap and Joomla 3.0 to power their frameworks. So, and actually one of the big ones I left out here was Joomla Art. But you have Joomla Art, Joomla Shack, Utheme, Joomla Bamboo, Gavik, and I'm sure there are others I'm leaving out. But these guys are already ready for Joomla 3.0. I know Rocket Theme is coming soon. So that's a big thing right there, right, for adoption, because people are worried about their templates, and tons of people use templates from clubs. So they'll just be able to update to the latest version and support everything. On the flip end of that is the markup that's going to be served, which comes from the components. And this is kind of the same story. It's really exciting. Some of these guys were already working on Bootstrap before 3.0 even came out, before the alpha. They already loved Bootstrap, so they were using it anyway. But now they don't have to load it, and they can use the core stuff and all the extended stuff that we added for them. So even very vocal developers that you probably hear some gripes about, like Nicholas from Akiba, all of his stuff is already working in Joomla 3.0, even though it's kind of like an alpha beta status. K2 is a prime example of a very massive component that everybody uses. And their latest version is compatible with 3.0. And I'll say a word about that. It's awesome that people are updating. A lot of people are making compatible versions. But the cooler thing is that they're also working on their next major release, which is going to be brand new from the ground up, built for Joomla 3.0. Because you'll notice when you install it, they're kind of back supporting some things for Joomla 2.5, or even some people do 1.5 support. But these truly native Joomla 3.0 components are going to be the ones that are awesome, because they're going to be the ones like I mocked up in the screenshots I showed you, that just load the Bootstrap and the JUI elements, and everything is completely standardized. And like I was saying, if they're not currently updated with their release, they are working on an update. You name a big component, and they're working on it. Some people are very close. Some people have alphas and betas released. So it's going to be super cool. It's going to be the first time that you ever go through a component from the front end or the back end. You go through your menu items and you click around, and it won't look like a ransom node, and it won't look like iframes. It'll actually look like all one unified site. You can go to the extensions directory, and under the advanced search, they have a Joomla 3.x checkbox you can check, and you can actually just press search. You don't have to enter any search parameters, and you'll see all the components that are updated. I think there's something crazy like 600 already. I'm not sure, but like I said, everybody's rapidly updating for it, and you can find them here. I'm not sure why the Joomla 3.0 tag is gold instead of blue, but I wasn't a part of that UX. So what's next? Now that 3.0 is out really soon, a few months down the road, we're going to have 3.1. You can only do a certain amount of work in those months, so there won't be any crazy additions. My biggest goal is to move from MooTools completely to jQuery. Right now, when you use Joomla 3.0, it still has to load MooTools and jQuery, even for the base core things. And if we're going to talk about being responsive and talking about mobile, we certainly can't be loading both of those libraries. So there's a few core functions that really need to be moved over to jQuery, like the save functions when you save an article, like the pop-up calendars and the color pickers and some things like that. So there will always be MooTools support, by the way. They'll have it in there, but I just want to have it off by default, and I want to let components load it if they need it. We're going to add more icons. Like I said earlier, IcoMoon has about 1,000 icons, and some component developers need it, and they don't want to have to add it themselves. This is the whole approach of 3.0. If component developers need it, we try to add in the core for them. So we're going to add tons of other sets, like I showed some of the social icons that they have in IcoMoon for all the different components. More jQuery UI stuff. We didn't add, there's a whole Bootstrap flavor of jQuery UI that we need to add in there so it can completely match. And just more jQuery UI elements, date selections, and things like that, beyond the calendar and color picker. I'm sure by then Bootstrap is going to be updated to the next version, so we'll have to update that. And it's not a huge pain since we don't really touch the core too much, but we still need to do it. We don't want people updating outside of us because we don't have the latest version. And hopefully we can do, I'm sure we'll do a lot of UI tweaks for 3.1. We probably won't do any massive UI changes. But for 3.5, which is the next long-term support that'll be around for several years, my big thing that we didn't get to with 3.0 is a better front-end admin experience. I mocked it up on the site when I was pitching Bootstrap for 3.0, but you can only do so much, so we didn't get to do it. What I want is a front-end admin toolbar where on every page you can easily edit the page settings. And these are essentially what we know as menu item parameters, right? But I want to be able to reveal this on the front end and easily tweak those things. But I also want more of an edit mode on the front end where you can do things like edit your logo. Wherever you have a menu, you can easily add a new page, right? Any modules, you'll be able to edit those modules in place on the front end instead of having to go to the back end for that. And hopefully things like drag and drop ordering of the modules. Just a lot of things that we could certainly do. It's all available, we just need to expose it on the front end. I'd also like to add some new workflows. On the back end, I had started a mock-up of a whole page creation flow, where very different from the menu creation flow that we have today. More of a wizard experience, where you say, new page, great, what kind of page is it? E-commerce, great. What categories show, or do you want to add a new category now? Great. Who sees this? Public, user group, great, publish. So I think that we can have a much more streamlined experience, just like the whole installation process. And that is it for me. I hope you guys like what you've seen. I hope you've tested it, and if not, go out and download it, and I'd be glad to answer some questions now.
Fantastic, thank you, Carl. Any more questions for Carl?
I'll just close the screen share.
Sorry, I can.
You can hear.
You did?
Oh yeah, okay.
I just close the screen share.
Cool.
Anyone got any questions about our presentation?
This is a little bit off topic. this is a little bit off topic, but I recently read that the two Bootstrap developers left Twitter, and I just was wondering if you know how that will affect Bootstrap in the future.
You got a question?
Did you get the question there, Nicole?
No, I couldn't understand it.
The question was, recently two of the developers in Twitter Bootstrap, they left the Bootstrap, and how is that going to affect the Bootstrap in the long run?
Yeah, so one of the guys, Mark, is going to GitHub, which is probably the most awesome company for a guy like him to work at. And the other, I'm not sure it, but plan is to just move, it's open source. So they're going to move the project out to Twitter.
Sorry, you cutting out there, Carl? We kind of missed the last answer to the question.
Okay, let me know when I sound okay.
So what was the answer?
Okay, so one of the guys went to GitHub and the other one is going somewhere else, but they're going to move the Bootstrap project to Twitter. And they're going to, it's a good thing, they're moving, won't be tied to a company, it'll be completely just open source out there by itself. And then they're going to continue developing it from there. So it'll actually get better. So there's nothing bad happening right now.
Any other questions?
I'll take it as it was all it's awesome and
You've overwhelmed them.
Question?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of using accessibility features like Chrome Vox, is there anything in the user interface that, or in the new design of Joomla 3.0 that will help screen readers and things identify content correctly? And
sorry.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that, Carl?
Yeah, I couldn't hear clearly again.
We're talking about features that help screen readers and accessibility features.
Yeah, so Bootstrap out the box lacked some accessibility, but they actually added a bunch of features in the recent release that we included, 2.1. I know Andy Tarr is our accessibility expert in the Joomla team, and she traveled out there and she worked with me on a lot of the things in the UI. So I don't know if this could answer the question, but it didn't take a step backwards in accessibility, and that we took steps forward in accessibility. I know we added a lot of hidden inputs that weren't there, and hidden labels, which are for screen readers.
Has that answered the question? Yeah.
There was a question in the earlier session about compatibility with, was it IE8?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Catch that, Carl. We were asked earlier about compatibility of Joomla 3 with Internet Explorer 8 and perhaps even, dare I say it, 7.
Yeah, so Bootstrap is actually compatible at IE7, even though we don't officially support it anymore in the Joomla project. So development, especially like IE8. So I think that everything's working. I'm going to be guilty. I stay away from PCs as possible. But well on IE9, but I assume things are working well on IE8 because some of the bug squad team members use IE8.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Any more? By the way, I've got some of these 9-fold free trial tickets for anybody who's asking questions. So there you go.
No last questions.
They may or they may not.
What was the question?
Just one. I have a question. The Bootstrap's being, thank you. Bootstrap's being used with Joomla. Is it being used with other open source CMS systems as well?
Did you get that one?
Yeah, I heard that one. I think that Context is one of the first ones to actually start using Bootstrap. I know that also WordPress and had interest in using it at the same time as us. They interpret the GPL license different than we do, so I think they got held up at some point with that. They were looking to implement it so they could follow up. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the community interprets things like CSS, images, and JavaScript as media. It's not the core PHP files that are covered. So even if it doesn't, even though those things which is what Bootstrap is, they fall into that, like Joomla templates. This is how there's commercial Joomla templates that protect their CSS and images. Because that falls a little bit outside the realm of our strict GPL for our PHP code and the core of Joomla. So that's kind of how we got. If you treat that as media, it's not really covered under. Right? Can you guys hear me better?
Yeah, much better.
Great. So to just finish up the last question, in the same way that Joomla template clubs treat the CSS, images, and JavaScript as media, it doesn't really fall under the derivative GPL for the PHP code. So this is why it wasn't a problem for us to include Bootstrap, because that's all it is there's no PHP or anything like that. It's just CSS, JavaScript, and images.
Carl, what license is Bootstrap issued under though?
I think it's GPL 3 compliant, which we need GPL 2 compliant for PHP code, but I think it's MIT, it's Apache probably. Let me see, I can say real quick. Yeah, it's Apache version 2.0, which is compatible with GPL 3.0. And Joomla, if we were concerned about that, Joomla needs GPL 2.0, but since it's CSS and JavaScript, it doesn't fall into that for us.
But how would commercial vendors extending an open source license go? It just occurred to me that actually might water down or affect the loophole that we've entertained for a long time.
I'm pretty sure if it passes the Software Foundation's legal decisions to get into the core, that you're fine to then do commercial things, just like with the core of Joomla today. But if you have any questions, you can contact OSM about that. I'm definitely not going to give legal advice or opinions about that kind of thing, because I make pretty pictures. I'm like a finger painter. But I know we did deal with them throughout the whole process, and it passed the Software Foundation's judgment.
Oh yeah, in terms of inclusion, I don't think there's any problem. But now that you've got a framework under an open source license, and template clubs are going to extend that framework, depending on whether the license is viral or not, it may trigger the viral nature of the GPL, and in doing so, neutralise that protection that we gave to the development shops in previously. So it could be that the CSS is now no longer protected, and only their imagery they can do under artistic licenses. But anyway, I'll put the question to OSM.
But at the very least, the Bootstrap is under the open source Apache license, so it's not like you'd be in any danger beyond that, right?
It's not a problem for the project.
Right, but you can use it yourself as a template shop outside of Joomla and use it as well. So you're protected under Joomla and by yourself.
Correct, but like Rocket Bean has the proprietary license on their CSS, for example. I'm just wondering if the Apache license now affects the ability of the template club to overlay that proprietary license on the artistic elements.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a question to ask someone else, but I will tell you that these same template clubs are already using Bootstrap. So that wouldn't change from what they were before Joomla 3.0.
Yeah, they mightn't have realised this afterwards. But anyway, I'll ask how it's
Yeah, they were certainly already using it. So however they figured that out, it still applies.
Any more questions here?
Does Joomla use an older version of Bootstrap, and what are the questions? Sorry, what are the plans for Joomla to keep up with the newer versions of Bootstrap that are being released?
Did you catch that, Colin?
Yeah, we'll be updating from the core all the time, and as you've seen, there can be supplemental releases, not just 3.0, 3.1, 3.5. Like we just had 3.0.1 came out, and with the easy updating process in the back end, so we'll be able to constantly update. But alternatively, I do also have plans to get a CDN hosted version of all this out there. So of course, if you're not behind a firewall or something like that, if you can use CDN hosted files, we're going to have the latest and the greatest available to the public through CDN.
Okay. Any more questions? No? Last chance? All right. Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.